Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Nerdy Brigade. And I welcome you all to a brand new series as well, known as Struggle and Triumph. In this series, despite its serious name, we are not going over how to deal with crippling depression. We are instead looking at something far less important: difficult video game challenges. So in this series we'll tackle difficult video game challenges, and you can watch these for either tips and tricks if you want to take on the challenge yourself, or if you get some sort of enjoyment out of seeing people get angry at difficult video game challenges, or you just want to see me succeed. Either way, this series will have you covered. So we're going to be going over pretty much anything I can get my hands on that I think would make for a good episode. In today's case, for the very first episode, we are going over the Secret Ultimate Boss Extra, the ultimate boss of Octopath Traveler, a nice little RPG title that came out a few years ago on the Switch and was recently on sale on Steam, so I got my hands on it. And the final boss itself being Galdera. So we're gonna be going over Galdera today, going over its mechanics, going over what makes it a difficult fight, and then we're finally gonna give it a ranking at the end of everything once we get past the actual struggle and triumph part. However, as you can probably tell, this video is pretty dang long, and I do not want you guys to be watching stuff that you don't necessarily need to watch. So the basic idea going forward here is I got this video put into multiple different timestamps here, depending on what you know coming into it. If you know nothing about Octopath Traveler and you have only like the most basic knowledge of RPGs, or even none honestly, then you can watch this video from the very beginning to the end, because part 1, which is the first timestamp, is going over Octopath Traveler as an RPG and the basic mechanics that make up its gameplay loop. The second part of this video, if you already know how RPGs work, then the second part of this video, I will be going over Galdera itself, the boss mechanics, and everything that I am facing in this challenge. So I'll be going over like a lot of the more technical stuff, like the stats and what each part of the boss does, her abilities and all that stuff. Boring nerd shit. And then the third section is actually when I'll be going a little into the struggle and triumph itself, as now you understand what I'm dealing with. I'll explain how that made me feel, which most of the time isn't good until the very end. Now, I should also stress that majority of the time in the future, I will be going for live reactions, because I think those are much better, but for this first episode today, I am unfortunate to say I have no live reaction to Galdera. I only have my very pixelated footage. But regardless, I really do hope you all enjoy. I'm planning on making this series. I have multiple episodes planned ahead for me to edit and work on, and I hope you all stick by. So click whatever timestamp suits best for you on the screen right now, or actually they might not be links, you'll have to go down to the actual bar at the bottom. But regardless, click on whatever timestamp you want and have a fun time. Thank you all. Let's go. So, I welcome you all to the first section of this video, which, as I said in the beginning, you should really only bother watching if you have literally no idea what the hell is going to be happening in this video, because you've never heard of Octopath Traveler, and you really don't have any experience with RPGs either. So, Octopath Traveler is, as I've said multiple times at this point, an RPG, a turn-based one at that. You have all the time in the world to make your decisions, use your skills and abilities every single turn, and each character gets their turn and then gets to do whatever the fuck they want, and then it immediately sort of happens.
How do you like this? Bring it on! Try this.
But the more important thing is I need to go over the Octopath Traveler specific programs that make it its own beast, especially when we're talking about the hardest challenge this game has to offer, because you need pretty big awareness, at least from a player's perspective, how to actually get that all done. So let's talk about that. We got ourselves 3 major mechanics I want to talk about, so you can have basic understanding. First and foremost, jobs. So if you are familiar with something like Dungeons and Dragons, or Nothing really. Jobs are your class, basically. They give you your skills and abilities that you're going to be using for basically the entire game. Most skills and abilities, upon consumption or use, will take up MP, which is another resource besides your HP that is has to be replenished via skills or items and whatnot, and is also very important to making sure that you can fight long. It's not that important Octopath Traveler though. MP's kind of easy to get, especially in this final battle when you're healing yourself with items that restore HP and MP. Anyways, so jobs, as mentioned before, are your class, and they give you your abilities. Every single one of your 8 protagonists comes with a defining starting job, and they cannot change that primary job, if you will. So those are the skills and abilities those characters are going to have for basically the entire game. However, each character additionally also possesses their own individual traits. Now, most of these aren't combat related, with the exceptions probably being about Alphen's, Cyrus's, and I think that's about it, honestly. Which allows for Cyrus to sometimes seize an enemy weakness. We'll go over that a bit. And Alphen, more importantly, gets to concoct items and other shit that have various effects on the battle. But the jobs themselves are what mainly make up the game's gameplay system. Now, each job obviously has its own abilities, but it also has its own passive skills to learn that you can equip up to 4 of. And you learn these skills and the passive skills, and you try to make specific character builds, because each character can additionally have a secondary job equipped, so they can have the abilities of 2 jobs, and they can learn the passive skills of any job in the game as long as you have the have it, basically. With the exception of like the 4 secret jobs that are spewed across the land in specific shrines, you should really have all of the jobs. But going into that, it's important to understand that you can only have one character equip the secondary job at a time. So, for example, you can't have 2 merchants, unfortunately. I mean, not unfortunately, maybe. But you can't have 2 of the same characters have the same secondary job. It doesn't matter what the hell the primary job is. You just can't have 2 people having the same secondary job. That's just the important thing. And going into this fight, I know we're not at the fight mechanics yet, but you need to have all 8 party members ready to do something, and so that means that you're actually going to have the classes divided in a way where everyone gets something to do, per se. And since you can't double your secondary jobs, that can make things a lot more difficult. So if you're confused as to why I don't just run 2 sorcerers to make the fight exponentially easier, that's why. But alright, that's the job system out of the way. The second thing to talk about is battle points, or brave points. I actually have no idea what they're called in this game. Basically, if you want your skills to have more oomph, if you see the orange little dots next to my character's names and probably above their HP bar, those are your brave points. They get accumulated every single turn, usually 1, but there's other effects that can change that. And you can spend those brave points to buff up your skills, basically, making them do more damage, decrease the duration of buffs and debuffs, or in the case of other abilities, actually gain access to them, period. These are called divine skills. Each class has 1, and they're pretty dang important. At least the majority of them are pretty important. Now, the brave points obviously get interacted with in lots of ways, as I've already mentioned before. There are ways to gain more brave points. The enemies, especially in this fight, there are multiple moves that they will do that will take away brave points, and vice versa. But mainly their use is to attack the enemy when their guard is down by spending all of them. You can hold up to 5, and 3 is the maximum boost you can have to an attack, or debuff, or whatever the hell skill you're using. And that's also the amount of brave points that you need to spend to be able to use the divine skill.
Here you go.
Well then, here I go! Alfred, bringer of flame!
Let enough get coming! Windhill, fight for this!
Every enemy has a list of weaknesses here, so as you've probably been watching the secret boss footage for a while now, you've seen the icons next to the shield number that each enemy possesses. Basically, once you hit an enemy on their weakness, that shield number will go down until it breaks. Once it breaks, that enemy will lose their next turn, and they will take a a lot more damage. So the basic combat loot of Octopath Traveler is to break your enemy's guard while maintaining a bunch of buffs on your party, and then once the guard is finally broken, then everybody spends a bunch of brave points and goes crazy on them. And that's... thanks, computer. And that's usually the combat system for the entire game. So, now that you have a basic understanding of that, we can go over to the boss and learn more about them individually. So, with that first section out of the way, and now you have a basic understanding, or you already did have a basic understanding of Octopath Traveler and what makes it its own little beast, we're going to be going into the actual secret boss itself, Galdera, or Galdera, or whatever you want to pronounce the name, honestly. It's a god, and most importantly, it's a god who can kick some serious ass. So, the fight against Galdera is split into two phases. The first phase is against the Omni Eye, or the Omni SNI. The Omni Eye has the largest hit point stat of any enemy in the game at 500,000. Apologies for my voice right there, I don't know what the fuck that was. Anyways, however, the Eye does have a large number of weaknesses and only 8 shields, which is relatively low with how much attacks you're capable of doing at this late in the game. And this will not even increase after every break that you do. However, the Eyeball does not fight alone. The Eyeball has multiple, I want to say, mini phases where it will use 3 soul monsters to attack you. So the first mini phase, the Eyeball will be completely immune to harm, which only extends just how long this fight goes on for. As they summon the souls, just the Raging Soul first, and then the other 2 souls immediately afterwards, unless you do a lot of damage when the Raging Soul dies, because the Eyeball will become unimmune to harm once the Raging Soul dies, before it summons the next 2. But that's a very specific circumstance. So let's actually, before we go on any further on any of the phases, I guess we should go over those souls actually. So first and foremost, we have the Raging Soul. This one is the heavy physical damage inflicting one. That's mostly what it does. We have the Screaming Soul, which will interact with the auras that the Eyeball will place across the screen that have numerous passive effects. Then we have the Wailing Soul, which pretty much, I want to say, just casts a bunch of magic. You'll see it more in the gameplay. It also inflicts just a lot of status effects too. Alright, so now that we've gone over the souls, I want to talk about the Omni Eye aura, because I mentioned that they interact with the Screaming Soul a little bit. So basically what the Omni Eye will do relatively throughout the fight, it does do actions. One of the actions it likes to spam is change the aura. So the types of auras are as specified. There is the Elemental Augmentation aura. This one makes all elemental attacks increase in their power, both for you and the enemy party. After doing this, the Omni Eye will usually use an ability that lowers your elemental attack, just to be a dick. But the Screaming Soul will usually do big elemental attacks afterwards, and it can actually be incredibly dangerous. The next thing I want to say is the Screaming Soul's ability to interact with the Blindness aura. Basically what this does is that your characters get lower accuracy on their physical attacks. It does not affect magic at all, but it can be incredibly annoying if your strategy is based around that. I got pretty lucky in this recording, but I'll go more over that when we get to the extra struggle and triumph section. And finally, the last soul aura, basically that's very important, is the Poison aura. So when the Poison aura is activated, all poison effects will not only take away your HP, but also your SP and your BP, your break points. And it's also the HP drain is a lot worse too. So this stuff is pretty goddamn dangerous in general, I want to say. And usually after this aura is deployed, the Screaming Soul will play, I want to say, like Contamination and poison your entire party, which is very, very annoying. At least I know good teamwork. So, after doing all of that, it's time to talk about more about the mini phases themselves. So after the first mini phase, which is just the Eyeball summoning the souls individually for the most part, the Eyeball will then summon all of the souls at the exact same time. Now, all these souls have now elemental weaknesses, but only one of them is active. And every time they get hit, the elemental weakness actually will switch to something else. And this part of the fight is really, really hard, and probably one of the hardest parts of the fight in general, because the Eyeball is immune to harm during this as well. And if you do not kill all of the souls at relatively the same time, they will just respawn, and then the ones that respawn at full health are going to be off kilter with the ones that are already damaged, and it'll just make things a whole mess. You really need a good strategy for dealing with these parts of the fight. because this could happen multiple times if you don't do enough damage in between once you actually finally destroy all the souls and get the opportunity to attack the eyeball. The third phase, the eyeball will again summon all of the souls, but this time it will not become immune to harm. Instead, the souls will have countdown timers on them. These countdown timers will tag along to one of your party members, and when that amount of turns passes, that party member will instantly die. This is probably the least consequential of all the phases, because this one, I mean, like, if you could kill the souls easily enough to get past the second phase, you can kill them easily enough here. They're no different. They just have the countdown timer, and 3 turns is pretty generous to kill them. So this one's really not that big of a problem. And unfortunately, I have no footage of the 4th phase because I killed him too fast because I'm a gamer. Is the eyeball will summon all 3 souls again and then consume them. And then it will gain 3 actions. Its shield gauge will increase, and it will gain permanent stat buffs as well. As all that goes by, you will poop your pants. It's very dangerous, though. Which is why I'm glad I didn't have to deal with it, because it is exceptionally difficult, the final phase. So high damage output is definitely appreciated. Both big damage. Whatever. I'll go more over it later. But that is the eyeball itself. It also has some damaging AoE spells as expected. Electrocute, it likes to spam. It also has the single target Searing Orb, and some other stuff too. But again, most other abilities at that point are very, very, I want to say vague-ish, or like not vague, but very rare. But you'll get a basic understanding of it going in. But that's the auras, that's the souls, that's the first phase really done. Now we're moving on to the second phase. So after dealing with the eyeball, you'll get like a Final Fantasy, whatever the fuck, 6 I think it is, moment where the screen will pan upwards as you ascend to face off against the real foe, Galdera the Fallen, no longer hiding behind a little eyeball. So Galdera himself is actually split between 4 body parts. He has a giant sword, he's got his mouth, he's got his daughter sticking out of his chest, as we all do, and he has himself, which is just kind of like his back, I guess. I don't know. So Galdera, as mentioned before, he's got 4 body parts. He's got 4 turns. And this part of the fight goes from a long-winded encounter with an eyeball who has like a wide range of abilities to just kind of like fuck you. Basically, how it functions is that these parts will attack you for absolutely ridiculous damage numbers, because we have the blade, which is pretty much the heaviest damaging physical attacker in the entire game. It's got the sweeps, it's got the single target, it's got a lot of physical damage. And then you got the Ebony Maw, which is perhaps the most bullshit thing I've ever seen in a video game. I'm getting a little too much into the struggle and triumph already, but the Ebony Maw is seriously not alright. It will spam these spells. I want to believe they're called like Icy Wind, Black Thunder, whatever the hell they're called. Basically, they're spells that, with the besides like the change in element, they just hit your party 3 times each spell for a pretty insane amount of damage. Unless your character's got a mountain of HP or a decent amount of HP and good elemental defense, you are not surviving this, because a glass cannon like Cyrus, for example, with nearly capped elemental defense, still cannot survive it with relatively low HP. So, sheesh. This is basically a kill or be killed scenario. LeBlanc, by the way, the daughter sticking out of his chest, mostly just focuses on buffing, and Galdera himself mostly focuses on buffing as well. He can augment his body parts to do more damage as well. So, the daughter is low priority, basically. And the Maw is the highest priority, unless your team's really getting swiped by the blade. But even if your team's getting swiped by the blade, your team's probably going to get killed by the Maw too. So, all these body parts have not a lot of HP, relatively, only about 125,000-ish, which is a lot, but it's not terrible compared to what you've been dealing before. It's about the same HP as the mini-bosses you had to fight to actually get here, relatively. And after each part is broken, they do not actually replenish, so the fight will actually get easier over time. But it's more important to destroy them all at the same time, relatively anyways, with big group covering attacks, because as each part breaks, the parts that are remaining will buff themselves up appropriately. and gain access to newer skills and stuff like that that you can easily avoid if you just do consistent damage to them at all times. It is very important, however, to try and get as many shield breaks as you possibly can, as destroying the enemy maw and giving your team a turn to rest is very, very, very appreciated, and the same goes for the blade as well. And at the beginning of the fight, when you actually get a few turns before, you know, your team starts taking a million damage, definitely break them off first, so you're not placed in a bad situation as soon as the enemy begins to move. However, once all the body parts are eventually destroyed, you will actually have access to Galdera himself. And again, you'll have a few turns before Galdera begins his assault. Now, he has not a lot of HP either, only 180,000, but he does have 3 actions at this point, and some of the most devastating spells and abilities you can find in the entire game. However, he doesn't have a lot of shields. And when you break his shield gauge for the first time, or actually later times as well, your entire party will gain full brave points. And this kind of makes this part of the fight like a victory lap. Because after you do that, if your entire party goes ham on Galdera, he really shouldn't survive anyways. The real most difficult part of the fight is getting past the kill or be killed nature of the blade and the ebony maw. I cannot overstress how difficult it is and just unbelievably damaging. Either you have an amazing damage output and you knew to target the ebony maw or the blade immediately, or you're like me and you're stalling for like 30 minutes just trying to actually stand up after you keep getting your leg swept by the gigantic sword. The gigantic sword, as we all know. But that is basically how the second phase functions. It's a kill or be killed nature, and after you do actually take care of the 3 individual parts, Galdera himself is actually more or less just a victory lap. Because if you had the damage output to take care of the other 3 weapons, you have the damage output to kill him. And that is Galdera as a fight. Now, might not have stressed it, but this fight can actually go on for quite a while. Now, I got lucky, and my eyeball phase only took about like 15-ish minutes, but for a lot of other players who have slower strategies, or just different strategies, that shit can go on for an incredibly long amount of time. In the second phase, Galdera should be quicker, but for me, it took way longer, because a lot of my characters were just dying over and over again, and I just had to keep resing them. So this fight usually will take like an hour plus, which is thankfully not terrible, because again, this is an RPG, so you could take a break if you really wanted to. So you don't need amazing heightened concentration for the entire period of the fight. Regardless though, that is basically everything going into it, and now we're going to talk about the triumph and struggle itself, and how I managed to overcome this boss and its rating. Alright, now we got the opera music blaring! Okay. So welcome you all to the final section of this video, where I go over my actual struggle and triumph, now that you understand the gameplay mechanics and the boss itself going into it. So, holy shit, I mentioned this earlier, but you need all 8 party members to actually be able to fight this guy. I went through the entire game with just 4 of them. I went with Alberic, Tressa, Cyrus, and like, where the fuck are they? Primrose. There you go. I went through the entire game with basically them, and then I just traded out Primrose for whoever I needed for that current chapter. So holy fuck was I not prepared for this fight, because there is no way in hell you're doing it without having 8 able party members. So my first step after immediately having my level 20 Therian get sliced in half by the giant blade was I had to go to the Forest of Purgation, or Purging, whatever the hell it's called, and I had to have Cyrus single-handedly wipe out the entire animal population. Nothing remains. It is literally just charred ash and terrible tornadoes in that area. Cyrus is a madman. Anyways, after spending about, like, I want to say like 6+ hours grinding my party members up to level 60 and trying to replicate my primary team with them, with Ophelia as my cleric, Alphen as my item, Therian as my item, bitch, Alphen as my pseudo Cyrus, and Hana as my pseudo Alberic, I attempted the boss again, and I immediately got my ass kicked. So here's a little problem. I didn't mention this in the tutorial, but not really the tutorial. I'll talk about the boss, but the fucking eyeball. I don't know if it's the eyeball or the souls. One of them has a goddamn move that seals your fucking magic, and that shit is the worst. I'm pretty sure it's a soul actually, because sealing your magic makes it so that my main DPS, which is with Alphen, couldn't do jack shit for 4 goddamn turns. And that is just a whole other level of terrible, because you can't cure the status effect, and there's basically just like, just nothing you can do about it. You're just fucked. And that's just unbelievably terrible. And like another thing, worst thing too, is that he could also silence my Ophelia, and then I wouldn't have Alfred's Auspicious on Alphen to make his spells actually worth the damn, because he's stuck using Scholar because I gave Sorcerer to Cyrus, because Cyrus has capped elemental attack, and he needs the big boy power. But not only can fucking, like, they seal Ophelia, but they can just remove all your, both the first phase and the second phase do this on random occasions, but they will just straight up just remove all of your buffs on your party, and it is ass on a whole other fucking level, honestly, that they can just do that, just go, boom, all your effort gone, fuck you. You know, I've heard, like, strategies that deal with, like, the Rune Lord, Transfer Runes just being unviable in this fight because of the buff negation that the boss does. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I would totally understand it, because it basically made having Alphen as my only attacker like complete and utter ass. Now, after getting my butt kicked, I'm like, alright, I'll just change Hanat into a warrior, and then I'll just insight the spell nullification, and then bada big bada boom. But then I forgot the freaking buff negation also gets rid of insight. That was a very stupid plan on my part. So the aggro that Hanat would provide with warrior would get nullified, and then the boss would just nullify Alphen again. So I was fucked, because I was just trying to replicate my first team with my secondary team, and I was having no success because Alphen as a scholar didn't have the same damage output as Cyrus as a sorcerer. So I was in a bit of a pickle. Now I get in the footage, it's gonna be like, oh, it's because you didn't have surpassing power on him or whatever, but like, he doesn't do that much anyways, even with the surpassing power. But the more important thing is that I figured out something. And what I figured out was that the freaking War Cry ability from the War Master class that you have to fight a secret boss to unlock, the Divine skill is really fucking good. Now, you've probably seen Hanat spam that shit like crazy in the footage so far, because it is ridiculous. It's the best skill for getting rid of the goddamn souls. It makes it so easy because of the elemental weakness difference in them sometimes. When they're summoned during the second mini phase, makes it so that the souls can die at random times, because like, oh, I'm hitting one of them for the weaknesses and I'm not hitting the others for the weaknesses, so it's like, fuck. But with the weapons, none of them are weak to physical weapons, so they all take neutral damage from it, meaning that they die relatively around the same time. And plus, the Warcry ability plus any of Alphen's magic, even without Alfred's Auspicious, is usually a kill on them anyways. So second phase was a complete and utter joke, and just because of how much damage Hanat's Warcry does, the eyeball was a joke too. I didn't even get to see its final mini phase as well, and so that made shit way easier. So if you have a hard time with any of these phases and you don't have the Warcry ability, I would definitely suggest the shit out of that, because that's pretty goddamn useful so far. It just does incredible damage. You do have to go out of your way to get the battle tested weapons like the Memorial Axe and the Giant's Club, but that shit's not hard. It's just look up a walkthrough, man. The other thing to primarily talk about is the second phase. So I actually managed to beat the second phase on my first try out of almost pure luck. I'm not gonna lie. Like let's just play the clip already. With fucking Tressa Divine Aura procking 3 times, it's a 25% chance to just negate damage. And yeah, she hit it 3 times in a fucking row right here. Like, holy shit. And that's important because the rest of the party got wiped, and she immediately took a physical attack from the sword that set her down to 1 hit point, and then she got the rest of the entire party. It was like, holy, that shit happened multiple times too. Thank God for Divine Aura. And also thank God for the revive ability on the Cleric, because that skill is almost mandatory going into this shit with how much your party wipes here and there. Now, I am aware there are more strategies than just my own. There's a bunch of other shit that people do. I've heard of capturing the mini-boss like the Devourer of Dreams that can do some pretty good shit. The Divine skill for the Apothecary, the Charity ability that allows you to just give your entire party full HP, MP, and Brave points by chugging the item that restores it usually to one party member, but Charity makes it apply to everybody. Again, I don't have footage of this, obviously, because I didn't use those strategies going into it. But I've heard all of that good nonsense, and if you want to try that stuff out, then go for it, man. I'm just telling you in general what you need to look for going into the fight. I don't think it's really that possible for most level 60 party members to actually tank the damage that the second phase deals out, because it is ridiculous. Sometimes like 8,000 damage to the entire party with specific combos. It is very fucking hard, even with like the best gear you can find across the goddamn land. It's just a lot. But as I mentioned before, focusing the Ebony Maw is definitely what you want. It can be hard, to be honest, because its weaknesses are all physical, and you don't exactly have the best opportunities to break that shit easily, because like, for example, like 1000 Spear on the Warrior class hits random targets, so it's going to hit like the Daughter and the Blade on certain occasions. I made the terrible mistake of going after the Daughter first, because I thought the Daughter was going to be the worst one here on my first attempt. Bad fucking idea. The Daughter is easily the least expendable. Yeah, she gets some more dangerous skills when the other parts die as well. But if you're spamming like big magic, the parts should die relatively around the same time, where that should not be nearly as big of a problem, I want to say. But yeah, this second phase took me fucking forever. Just like the amount of luck, all of life chunking, jam chunking. I went through my entire inventory in like less than a goddamn second. I was like, because I just had to heal so fucking much. I had to res so much because Primrose was fucking worthless, dude. She was getting one-shotted by literally everything. Just everything was just fucking killing her. And Cyrus wasn't much better, but hey, at least if Cyrus lived, he actually did something and did like fucking amazing damage output to the enemies. And eventually, with enough Tressa divine aura luck and Cyrus actually managing to stay alive or actually going first, I managed to finally destroy all the parts at like literally the exact same time and get onto Galdera himself. And I don't know if it's like universally accepted that the final getting all the bonus points, brave points from destroying Galdera's shields for the first time is like considered like the victory lap. It felt like the victory lap for me because I immediately fucking killed him after I did that. So that was nice. I didn't want to deal with any more fighting after I've been fighting for like an hour at that rate. But I'm not gonna lie at all. I got super fucking lucky in this fight. Like, the amount of times where Divine Aura saved my ass is absolutely ridiculous. Like, I just... like, goddamn, dude. And also, the amount of times I full res the party with the revive ability on the Cleric is just another testament of what you probably need going into this fight. I've heard people who managed to deal with second phase Galdera incredibly quickly by just doing incredible damage output before the enemies even get to move. And I don't doubt it. They don't have a lot of HP, honestly, nor do they have a lot of shields. And if you know how to focus the right parts of the body, they can die relatively quickly. So again, it really is about doing just all that incredible damage relatively early. Now, I should also stress that the abilities that you're kind of want to get, I haven't really talked about passive skills all much. I want to be brief on this. BP Eater, Elemental Aid, Elemental Edge, Physical Prowess, those are really good ones that raise your damage output and give you permanent augmentation, so you don't have to worry about like buffing your party before they actually do all their shit. Divine Aura, as I mentioned before, is very good. It's a little luck based, obviously, but it obviously can really help, especially since a lot of the enemies have multi-hit attacks anyways. I want to say that Patience is good if you got like an item bitch or somebody who can just really benefit from having an extra turn in general. Having a Merchant is very important. Like, some jobs are just not going to get used in the final fight. You only need 8 of them. Oh, I want to say like 12-ish. Merchant is absolutely should be somebody's secondary because the donate BP skill is one of the best skills in the entire fucking game. And again, this is the final fight, so just chug all those fucking high level items, man. Just chug them like fucking crazy. Don't even bother with like healing great mediums. Just chug all the jams, chug all the fucking all of the life larges like that you need. Just keep going with it. And if there are other strategies you want to try out, like the charity strategy or doing some Rune Lord stuff, or the capturing beasts with the knot and using the devour, like there's a lot of stuff that you can look up online. But I think the beauty of beating this fight is figuring out your own strategy with your own party and overcoming it as what the group that you have like built over the entire game, basically. I would say that's the most rewarding part about it. Now, I did look up a little bit when I had to look for the Warcry shit, so I'm not gonna act like I completely made my own strategy, but for the most part, this was my own thing going into it. And if I can do it, you can do it, man. It does take a lot of patience to get shit done, and a lot of grinding too if you don't have like all your party members like at appropriate levels, but it really isn't that bad. Is what I would say if you didn't have to deal with that stupid 8-boss mini rush before you actually get another attempt at the boss. What the fuck were they thinking? That shit is so annoying. like, just a tangent right here. Fuck that shit. I hate that so goddamn much. It doesn't take long, the mini-bosses aren't threatening, and reading the journals the first time is really interesting. Every other time, it's just annoying. Why the fuck did I think that was a good idea? Just to make it so the amount of attempts that you have against Galdera is a little low because it takes like fucking like an hour just to get to him again? I don't know. I hate it. But that's whatever. I told you, you gotta have a little bit of patience to actually get past this boss fight. If you don't feel like failing just to learn like one new thing about the boss fight, you can't just look up the shit. I mean, if you've already watched this video, you probably have a better understanding of what you're actually dealing with now. But yeah, that's basically everything going into it, and I'm gonna shut off the opera music in a hot second. Ooh, boop. Huh. Whew. Apologies if I was exceedingly angry there for a bit, or loud, but I felt appropriate since I'm not going to have a live reaction for this episode of Struggle and Triumph. I felt it was necessary for me to display the same level of energy that I was feeling during the actual fight itself. But anyways, we have finally gone over Galdera himself and his fights. So now comes the part of the video where I'm a little bit confused, to say the least. So I mentioned earlier that I was going to give a ranking to this fight, and that this is kind of like a series thing I'm going to be doing. So the ranking system, I made it with my friend, with my buddy. You probably seen it in some of the episodes if you watched this channel for a while, Burrito. It's just a star system from 0 to 5. With 5 usually being like unbelievable feats of gaming that like only like a few people in the world are capable of doing, and 1 stars and stuff like that being like relatively difficult challenges, but nothing that somebody can't do without enough patience and dedication. So, and I also want like borderline stars as well. Like for example, a certain challenge might be like borderline 2 stars in that scale, where it's only barely worth that kind of rating, which I also feel like mentioning on certain occasions. That's like the ranking system going forward. For now, at the very least, it's subject to a lot of change because I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. But the important thing is that that's what I'm going to be really doing. This series is going to be my main focus going forward on the channel. And I hope you guys kind of enjoy. Future episodes will have more live reactions. Instead of me having to tell you everything in the story. I'm obviously going to go over the game and the challenge itself before giving you the live reactions as like a relative formula, but it shouldn't be all that bad, honestly. But as for Galdera's rating itself, I'm going to give it a 2-star ranking on the scale. Might be a little high to some people, because it is just 1 boss. But I believe Galdera is pretty damn challenging. It requires very, very, very in-depth understanding of the game itself. And requires a lot of patience to understand what you're dealing with, and for the amount of, like, just the amount of time each attempt will take out of you. The only reason why I don't feel like ranking it any higher is because it's an RPG, so it doesn't require, like, incredible reactions or, like, thinking speed or whatever the hell. Like, you have all the time in the world to think about it, and guides can kind of trivialize this fight. So to some people it might be worth borderline 2 stars, since you can just look up exactly what to do and you'll relatively beat the fight. But even so, copying somebody's homework is not usually advised. But again, thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I know this was quite a lengthy one, but I'm hoping to make this series going forward because I would like to share my struggles and my triumphs in video games going forward with everybody. And if you've got any stories to talk about Galdera, or if you have any recommendations for episodes of Struggle and Triumph, please leave a comment below. I mean, I've been stuttering really hard here. I didn't plan a prologue, but an epilogue, but I felt like it was appropriate. But again, thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.